Ms. Waldron.
Just to jump on with what Mr. Holden said, we as legislators, once we get out into the public and we're on recess and things like that, we always have members of the public coming up to ask us, what about this initiative? What about that initiative? We always get that. So, what you're saying is true. We may not necessarily have questions now, but it would be helpful to keep that dialogue and be able to ask those questions as we go forward, because we will inevitably get those questions. Thank you.
Senator Anderson.
Thank you. Perhaps you could clarify for us. The reason why you're asking for questions in the way you have is because the process that could have been performed months ago, that was supposed to happen months ago, is last minute now for you. Questions that weren't presented to you were presented to you on Friday, which kind of leads to the whole 72-hour issue of being blindsided by this committee. And I know it's not the committee's purpose to blindside you, but on the same token, I don't want you to believe that our additional questions are necessarily hostile. But on the same token, I'm not sure every member realizes how this process has somewhat been blindsiding. No other initiative has been treated this way. So I think there might be some misunderstandings, and perhaps you could address that issue.
I'll make an attempt at it, Senator Anderson. Thank you. The reason we as proponents are asking if there's an issue, if there's a problem, if you've identified some significant difference in policy, please alert us now, is because of the fact that we are literally 2 weeks away from that moment, June 30th, where the ability for us to withdraw the measure goes away. And as Senator Anderson mentioned, we reached the 25% threshold, which is the moment when this type of hearing can be convened, on February 11th, 4 months ago. 4 months ago, we were ready to have a conversation. And again, even that would not be an issue except for the fact the legislature's rushing to put their own measure on the ballot, which could potentially compete with this. So when we ask for your feedback and are seeking an understanding of what's the problem you're trying to solve that we're not solving, it's not an academic question, it's not a rhetorical debate, it's not an engagement in sophistry. We really need to know, because if there's a problem, a substantial problem, then there may be motivation to sit down and do something else, for example, with the vehicles that were mentioned earlier. And why this is so important is the following. If that is not the ultimate goal of the legislature, specifically to identify a critical defect or policy disagreement and then resolve it through compromise, but it's something different, then I think we need to bear in mind the words that were in this morning's Dan Walters article, and they are, whether SCA 14 goes before voters depends on whether at least a few Republicans support it, since it requires a two-thirds vote with a June 30th deadline to place it on the measure, the November ballot. If both measures pass, the one with the most votes would prevail. But if voters are confused by two measures on the same subject, both could be rejected, and we'd be back where we started on making the legislative process more transparent. So the question here is this an exercise in putting a competing measure on the ballot to confuse the public? I don't believe that it is. Others are concerned it might be. If not, then what is the problem that we can speak to right now in front of you, because you'll be voting on a competing measure which could produce this bad outcome that's been warned about in this morning's paper? That's why we're asking this question.
Well, to be honest with you, this is my first stint on rules. I've not served on elections. This is 3 years for me, and this is the first time that I think, at least my understanding, that we've had this kind of conversation about a proposition. There have been plenty of them out there, and I'm not saying it hasn't happened in some context, but to all be sitting here right now giving you the opportunity to present. Now, I can't answer the timing issues, because you talk about roll the clock back 4 months ago, and I'm preparing legislation for this cycle. and asking LAO and engaging on my legislation. And so I'm not tuned in as you have been on your initiative. I've now been asked to tune in. So I'm here and I'm taking notes, and that's all I can do at this moment. And my apologies if it comes down to 2 weeks, but welcome to how sometimes the sausage gets made, right. And you're keenly aware of that. And so we're here, and I think it's everyone's intention to find out where the equilibrium is on all of this, and what is the best way to move forward. At least that's my intention. But again, I may not have a question for you at this particular moment. I have ideas and thoughts that have arisen based on your presentation, and I'll go back and I'll talk to my staff and others, and through the chair, if we have a series of questions, we will be prompt in presenting those to the chair.
So, do you have some
look,
particular points on the language of ledge analysts? I can answer a few of them if you like, but
why don't you do that, and then I understand you're going to be preparing some written remarks
yes.
in more detailed response, and that way that'll be on the record, and you'll have an opportunity to
right, and all of you will be able to actually get what our best answer to the questions that the co-chair has raised.
Okay. Did you want to raise it first, or should we wait for?
Well, I can raise it anytime. I can raise it anytime.
What do you prefer, Senator?
All right.
Do you prefer?
How about I'll do it now, and then I'll
there you go.
Quiet. I'm more looking at this from a process standpoint, and just trying to think about how the process works. And I have to say, on behalf of from an institutional standpoint, in the 1900s, we had Artie Samish. Artie Samish, the horrible lobbyist, who had Confederates in the engrossing and rolling office, and was able to slip language in beyond the reach of members to change it in the official record. We now have, as an institution, of necessity, just a human institution, all organizations, we have deadlines. We have budget deadlines. We have end of session deadlines. We now create a dynamic where if somebody, by any means, slips language into a bill at that last 72-hour window, no member has seen it, but your choice at that point is you either kill the bill, vote it down, or somehow there's reasons it moves forward. I think there's actually plenty of your constituents who didn't like the way the minimum wage thing got worked out, which was sort of action under pressure, feeling the need to move forward, with sort of this new dynamics. I'm just, some of the small business people I meet with in my district, confounded by how the process unfolded. And yet the legislature, it made sense to do something. My concern is this language, and I'm not saying I'm opposed to it, but there's no ability to amend to strike language if people think it's objectionable. There's no ability to, oh my God, we need to amend another bill to double join the two so that it can cancel out a provision that somehow got slipped in. There's tools in the legislature's toolkit to keep the process well grounded. And the 120 lawmakers feeling that what we are passing is our collective best judgment. We sort of set up with this deadline. And again, I'm not averse to time for observation. But in an institution that gets crowded up against deadlines, sort of like the old Artie Samish thing, if someone can just slip some language in right at the last minute, all 120 members are sort of taken out of the ability to get something dumped. And it can be purely technical. It could be that maybe, oh my gosh, we agreed that a bill was supposed to have all the shalls taken out to May, and some of them got missed. How do we fix that? Or it can be something more pernicious, that somebody had a plan and they got some language in, and of course it got drafted that way. So I understand the desire for accountability, but I think accountability for the people of California is vested in the 120 lawmakers. And I think when you get up against a deadline and a member has no effective tool in the toolkit to say, wait a second, you can commend the reporters that look at this stuff, But today I had my staff saying, I want you to check against some of the bills I'm going to be voting on and looking for particular code sections that might have popped up that would be of interest to me. And I'm the sort of member that would do that. And my colleagues, I can guarantee, I serve with an outstanding 120 lawmakers, and as we have more time to serve together, we are all going to be more assertive, and I think that's what the public wants. So I see the broad philosophy and thing, but I object to the funding. I don't think it's well served to be on one entity, and I actually think that you haven't thought through the ramifications for good, responsive, effective government, strong legislators raising their hand saying there's a problem here. I think that 72 thing needs some work. There's some other variations out there that I actually think start solving this problem, but I don't think it's in yours, personally.
So I know Assemblymember Chang has comments, and then Assemblymember Waldron. Yeah, that's it.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. And I think you can tell that the committee has some very thoughtful members on here, and we are clearly thoughtful in the need to want to review material before making a decision. So this exercise, this hearing, I believe, is a great example of the need to have something in print for 72 hours at least, to be able to have a thoughtful process. And I love my colleague, Mr. Cooley, and I understand that you value and respect the process. However, in my 2 years of being here, I've been observing some inefficiencies in the process, which I think that we can improve upon. I've also noticed that quite a few bills are introduced to correct some unintended consequences from bills that have been signed in the past. And I believe that if we engage in a more thoughtful process, having more time to deliberate, to go through the details, we can eliminate that, and we don't have to keep introducing bills to correct some of the deficiencies of prior bills. So I think this is a really great thing, and I just want to say, as you can tell, once again, that members are very thoughtful, and we want to do the right thing, and we want to be able to introduce thoughtful legislation. I think this is a great tool to be able to provide that.
So we've asked Dr. Munger a question. We've put him off several times. Ms. Waldron, I'm going to let you have the last comment, and then we'll take no more comments from members for the moment. So allow Dr. Munger to answer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just hearing the conversation and being a member now 4 years, the issue that were brought up about the kind of tools that legislators have at the last minute when things are presented on the fly is kind of a symptom of the problem you're trying to solve with your initiative. If someone tries to sneak language in and throw it to the floor on the wharf with a 72-hour, mandated time to look at it, if they sneak language in, someone's going to find it. The alternative then is to kill the bill. So over time, people are going to learn that doesn't work anymore, and that process, I think, is what you're trying to solve, that we're not going to have to deal with that. And I remember as a freshman legislator, our first year, and I have to commend, because we had 38 new members, and then we added 3 more when other folks ran for other offices. So, we were in the majority of 80 members were freshmen. And we did the bill that came through for the Sacramento Stadium with a CEQA exemption that kind of went through the whole state on a lot of things. We took a break, came back. There was a wharf bill that undid everything in the CEQA exemption except the stadium. And to the credit of the freshmen, 33 Democrats joined with Republican freshmen, and we did not. That bill died. It was the last bill we voted on before we recessed. So those wharfing things, those type of things would eventually start to go away because they wouldn't work. And the reason things are left to the last minute is for more of a control or to get things pushed through without the public and even us seeing them. So that's just my response to that.
Thank you. Now, I understand that you've been asked to address some of the things from the
Happy to.
and rather than put you on the spot to let you respond to what you want to, you said you'd submit something in writing, and
Correct.
I think that's very preferable at this point. So, your turn.
All right. I can address one of them from Mr. Ben Allen, who's been suffering because he asked his question and got no answer, and I think I can address some of your concerns. The first is that 72 hours applies to the bill that dismisses a bill from a House. So if you're in the Assembly and you are going fast and furious through committees and you're amending bills on the floor and somebody says, I move to put in some bunch of junk, and they get it on there. If you notice it 20 minutes later, you can take it right out. The only thing that starts the 72-hour clock is the Assembly pronounces itself satisfied. They want this to become law. They're putting it out of the Assembly, and if the Senate and the governor like it, they're good. So the only time you're going to be in a problem is if the language in question that's bad and discovered at the last minute is discovered when we're just about to dismiss the bill from the floor. Now, I submit that the Assembly can probably learn to stop putting bad language in those circumstances. But the worst thing that's going to happen to you is you're going to have to say, well, we had that bad language 71 hours ago. We only discovered it now. If we change it now, we're going to wait 72 hours before we can move it to the Senate. That's the limit of the problem. So when you think about legislation, I mean, the worst thing that's going to happen to you in practice, suppose at the end of the day, you're at the end of the session this year, you got every bill done except one, and somebody finds a problem. And you want to move it out of the Assembly, and you want to move it to the Senate. And the Senate's waiting, and it doesn't care. And you say, okay, guys, we're going to amend it in the Assembly. We're going to go home. We're going to come back in 3 days. We're going to move that bill to the Assembly, vote in the Senate. It's law. Your problem is you had to come back for one more day to deal with that one last bill, assuming it was important enough for you to do so. Now, in terms of the practicalities of this, and this addresses part of your question, we didn't find this idea from nowhere. One of the language questions we were asked is why we said, if I can find the exact phrase, no bill may be passed or ultimately become a statute unless the bill is up for sale. Why did we stick in may be passed or ultimately become a statute? And Ledge Counsel said it's ambiguous, it's not necessary. We took that from the Constitution of the State of New York, which provides that no bill may be passed or become a law unless it has been printed on the desks of members for 3 legislative days. All right, so we're copying something that's been in the New York Constitution for a little while, 112 years. Now, the state of New York is one of the original colonies. I may have that wrong. Maybe 1 is 16. I'll come to that in a moment. But it's well over a century. It's one of the original 13 colonies. Governorship of New York the legislature of New York has dealt with every crisis imaginable. We've dealt with world wars. We've dealt with recessions. We've dealt with people blowing up the Twin Towers. We've done all of that. And somehow or other, the New York legislature says, it's not a bad idea before the final vote in the bill for the legislature to actually see it. And they have an exception that the governor can waive it, which we also have. Another state that has this is the state of Idaho. It has a 3 several day exemption. The most interesting one is the state of Hawaii. The state of Hawaii says that all the bills have to be in final form for 48 hours. There are no exceptions whatsoever in the Constitution of the state of Hawaii. Hawaii is a very interesting state because they put that in mid sort of 1967. Hawaii lives on top of volcanoes. It is subject to repeated hurricanes, and within living memory, it has watched the U.S. Pacific Fleet sunk at Pearl Harbor by enemy attack. And it somehow thinks that to deal with whatever might come their way, their legislature can manage to do it if the bills are available for everyone to see for 48 hours. We do not think that this provision is going to seize up the California government. We have, if you want me to go through how it affects specific bills and the specific deadlines, at the end of the day, this is not going to be a problem. The examples of New York, Idaho, and Hawaii make it pretty clear that this is going to work. And again, we've copied constitutional language because we just don't want to reinvent the problem. No one's had a Supreme Court issue with that language since its writing. We declined to reopen that question. So that's one of them, and it's relevant to your question. The other ones we're happy to respond to in writing before this committee, as long as the record becomes part of the public record on this meeting.
And it will.
Thank you.
In just a second, I'm going to move to public comment. Before I do, let me allow you to close.
Thank you. I'll make my comments brief. Thank you for your very thoughtful questions, and thank you for your patience in giving us an opportunity to address those questions. Since I mean that great sincerity. Again, as someone who loves this institution dearly, I believe these are the kinds of reforms that, if adopted, will allow us, I think, to serve with greater distinction and to avoid these moments when we have to go back and explain to our press, our public, and sometimes our families how certain bills became law. Because in the future, we'll be able to read these bills. In the future, the public will be able to see what's happening in these rooms. And in the future, what's happening in these rooms will be widely available for the public's support, approbation, or disapprobation. With that, I would urge you to think very carefully about putting a competing measure on the ballot, which could ultimately, if there's confusion generated, thwart these reforms. Thank you very much.
And, of course, the Honorable Gordon knows I've been attending the hearings on the bills the legislature developed. I think that I'm now into maybe starting hour number 5 in the last week before you all. Apropos of the Honorable Holden's concern, there's an ongoing conversation about what the legislature should do in response to this initiative. Our first and foremost job, which is a question we're willing to have come in after this meeting if need be, is tell us what's policy objections from, for example, Mr. Cooley. Tell us what the language we've got wrong. Okay, convince us, A, that there's a flaw in our measure that's so bad we should yank it. We want to hear it because we don't want to do the people of California an injury, but we have to hear there's a problem before we even contemplate that. The second one is that we think we've got a very good foundation, the bill we already have, to deal with these issues. And if the legislature wishes to engage in working on transparency, it can continue working on the bills in question. I've testified at the Appropriations Committee that as written, I won't yank the CLTA if those are passed as they are. And I do not think that a bill which is that it's a good idea for the Senate to dismiss a bill to the Assembly without being able to say to the public that we, the Senate, think that bill, if the Assembly takes it as is, should become law, should amend the Constitution. I don't think you're there. But I'm willing to engage. We've got 15 calendar days. If you want to keep having public hearings about bills, legislation, and so forth, I'm happy to attend to the limit that my wife will let me. You have to, I'm not here to draft a solution for you on 2 weeks. It took us months, all right, to try to get where we are. You're working under a deadline imposed by the legislature itself. I know you have many other things to deal with, but if you can't close this deal at the end, what I suggest you ought to do is simply say, do the CLTA, let's see if the voters pass it, and if there's something in it you don't like, which may be as simple as where the money comes from, well, you're the legislature, and June, 18 months later, if you want to say, we have an amendment to offer to the public and we want the public to support it, you can do that. The question is there something so bad in this that you can't wait 18 months to fix it? Is there an idea so good that you have right now that you want to have a head-to-head ballot, possible head-to-head battle on the ballot with all of transparency in the line to get that reform when you could ask for that reform in 18 months? You're not going to be in conflict with us if you just don't put it on the same bloody ballot. You could, So I'm willing to engage with you. I continue to do that, but with respect, this institution is running out of time, and it's going to be difficult. So I'm willing to engage because there might be a big upside to this. But understand that if it doesn't happen, it's not going to be because I didn't want to engage or I'm not willing to talk to my legislature. It's because you've run the clock out of yourself. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Let me now invite members of the public who would like to make a comment. We have a microphone set up. If you would line up, and encourage you to be to the point, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members. And to the point, Fred Silva with California Forward, we're actively supporting the CLTA. I would suggest to you, many of us have been involved in this since 2009, looking at different approaches to legislative transparency. California Forward put together an initiative, Prop 31, that included a vote requirement, a print requirement. It also actively supported SCA 10 that Senator Walt carried back in 2013. So our active support has been based basically on this notion that there ought to be more legislative transparency and some form of a print rule so that everyone sees all legislation. Much of the emphasis has been placed on gut and amends. I would submit to you that the CLTA applies to all legislation, including conference reports, including legislation that you all deal with in special session. So as you're considering this, think about the breadth of the application, not simply to certain circumstances like the gut and amend issue. So we're actively in support of the measure.
Thank you. Next.
Members, my name is Tom Scott. I'm the State Executive Director for the National Federation of Independent Business in California. 22,000 members, strongly supportive of the CLTA. I know members of the committee might say, well, why is transparency a small business issue? I am here to make it clear that this is a major issue for small business and that this initiative is by far the best proposal at our fingertips to create a more open and accessible government for our job creators across the state. Every day, my members tell me that they worry about what's going on under the dome, whether it's here in Sacramento, whether it's in D.C., and whether it's new regulations that are constantly coming out of nowhere that they're not aware of or legislation. But my members know that one bad bill out of these halls can be the death knell that closes their businesses for good. I hear these stories all the time, and it's not fiction. And honestly, what we witnessed, as Assemblyman Cooley mentioned about the minimum wage, to me, for the 21st century to see a deal cut on a Saturday before Easter, no public participation, one committee assignment in appropriations, no analysis, 2 floor votes, and then a signature by the governor, to me was just unbelievable. No business at the table, no retirees at the table, no nonprofits at the table. I mean, if anything, that to me is the model for why people should be supporting the CLTA. And I'm not going to even get into budget trailers. I've been watching Twitter, and there are things that I'm learning every second, as to what's going on. But regardless of how you feel about the debate on minimum wage, I'm not really here to argue the issue. But the abandonment of the public process and good government demonstrated that in ramming SB3 through this building a few months ago reaffirmed our need for real transparency here. There are important substantive differences between the initiative constitutional amendment before us compared to the legislative proposals. Honestly, transparency, people throw it up on their websites. They mention it in every other sentence. For me, what is the cost of transparency? $1 million, $2 million? Public participation, engagement? To me, I say, hey, whatever it costs to make sure the people in this state know what's going on is well worth it. And quite frankly, I think this, 1 million plus people have signed this. And then for the legislature in the final 2 weeks to come along, with even what I would question, how transparency have the 2 legislative proposals been, is really, this is the 21st century. We can do better. CLTA, to me, is the answer. Let the people vote.
Well, Mr. Chair, John Kupal, Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association, we strongly support this particular proposal. Among the many motivations is the fact that the incident referred to by Sam Blakesley with the video recording being turned off during the opposition arguments in what was supposed to be an informational hearing on Proposition 30 was so shameful that the Sacramento Bee excoriated the legislator who was responsible for that. I won't mention his name. Rumor has it he's going to be a mayor around here someplace. But also, the chairwoman of the committee, Lois Wolk, was incensed that this had happened in her committee, that the video recording had been shut off. We greatly support transparency. We also like this particular proposal for what it does not contain. It's going to shock you that we like this because it does not contain a tax increase. But finally, the cost. As a percentage, has been mentioned, of the total legislative budget. This is, I think, to use an LAO term, is referred to as budget dust. Strongly in support.
Thank you. Next.
Yes, Chairman and members, Terry Frank with Californians Aware, a nonprofit organization that spends a good deal of its time, not all, but a good deal of its time, in policing the Brown Act, so to speak, in urging improvements and defending against measures that would water it down, in educating and helping to get adequate training for local officials who don't understand what the Brown Act is or how to comply with it. And after about 36 years of doing this with local agencies around the state, what strikes me is that they are already operating under a regime which requires them to provide adequate notice to the public of the specifics of things that are being proposed for policy before the vote. So they may come forward and ask questions and make statements. They're already under a regime which says that they must allow audio and video recording and photography of their proceedings unless the body makes a finding that, practically speaking, it can't be done without noise or disruption of the process, which, of course, now with photo cameras in their phones is no longer an issue anyway. We deal with organizations that, on their own, increasingly subject their meetings to recordation and archiving without being told to do so because they think it's a good idea. So with that kind of experience with local officials of goodwill, when we were approached to ask for our support for this measure, it seemed to be a natural. Thank you.
Good morning. Gavin Baker with California Common Cause. We are in support of the ballot initiative. We think it's fundamental that legislators should have an opportunity to read a bill and to hear from their constituents before they have to vote on it. And so we believe that this initiative, which contains a 72-hour transparency period before a vote in either house, is a common sense and balanced rule that would allow legislators the opportunity to read something, to hear from their constituents about issues before they have to vote, while also allowing the legislature to keep the trains rolling and be able to do their job. Chairs, thank you very much for holding this hearing. I'll just quickly note that Common Cause was a co-sponsor of SB 1253 in the previous session, which created these public hearings for initiatives. We think it's important for voters to be able to have some information about what they're voting on. We think that these hearings are also useful because they create a record that courts can look to when they're interpreting these initiatives. So thank you very much for holding this hearing to build that record. Thank you.
I'm Lee Lawrence, Government Director for the League of Women Voters of California, and we strongly support transparency and the public's right to know. So we deeply appreciate the provisions in the CLTA initiative and hope that they end up in the final solution, however that comes. I'm also wanting to speak on behalf of our senior program director, Trudy Schaefer, who is unfortunately on the East Coast, but she has perhaps noticed with some frustration there may be some need for attention to transparency in the whole budget trailer bill process, and we recommend that to your attention as well. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Anyone else from the public? Let me thank my colleagues and my co-chair for participating in this hearing, and let me specifically thank the proponents. Appreciate you being here and providing the information, and the public for participating, and those who are also watching us as this is being broadcast. With that, we will adjourn this hearing, and thank you all very much.